Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to talk about autism, sensory emotions, social thinking, social context, pretty much anything you can think of, fixations, obsessions, and special interests, and pretty much anything you can think of that's related to the topic of autism. So we're going to dive into, now this is just an introduction to some of these topics. We only have an hour tonight or so. So we're going to talk about these topics a little bit and just get some general knowledge of them. And then we'll come back in a couple weeks and have some more advanced discussions. So this presentation is called Autism Sensory Overloaded by Emotions. And we'll start the show. Presentation here. All right, so autism sensory overloaded by emotions. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Travis Breeding. I'm an author of 20 plus books on the autism spectrum and mental health. So public speaker, podcaster, uncle to two nieces. I'm a blogger. I do more vlogging, video vlogging nowadays than I do blogging. I was born in Huntington, Indiana, just moved to Fishers, Indiana, and I'm living my best life here in Fishers, Indiana. My autism diagnosis came at the age of 22. I was diagnosed by a psychiatrist. I immediately continued counseling. I was in counseling beforehand. I wanted to learn, what was going on. I knew some stuff was going on socially. I wanted to learn what was going on socially in order to, actually figure out how to better my life. And so I started out with how do you get a girlfriend when I went to counseling. And eventually that led them to questioning some more things and leading us to a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. Before I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, though, I was diagnosed with bipolar and OCD. Let's talk about the DSM-4 versus DSM-5. So I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome in 2007. So it was the DSM-4 diagnosis. DSM-5 was introduced in 2013. So Asperger's versus level 1 autism. I'm really big on the Asperger's diagnosis. I love the Asperger's diagnosis because I'm an Aspie. I learned to identify myself as an Aspie, and that's part of my identity. That's part of who I am. And so it's very different for me to say I have level 1 autism than to say that I have Asperger's syndrome, just because I worked on self-esteem for a number of years, accepting my Asperger's diagnosis and really using that as a core part of my identity. So it's very difficult for me when people try and take that away from me. Let's talk about sensory overload. So we're all familiar with sensory overload, right? We often think in terms of physical sensations or sensory inputs or outputs. Temple Grandin tug machine for squeezing is an example of some sensory issues. She didn't like to be touched by people, but she liked the pressure of being squeezed and touched. So she invented this hug machine that helped her to get that sensation met, which is very important. So nowadays there are lots of sensory toys and activities. We use the occupational therapy to incorporate some of those toys and activities into our daily lives. Sensory issues can be taste, touch, smell, sight, etc. Any sense that you have or you can think of people with autism have and experience at a magnified level. And they can also be emotional senses, which is what we're going to talk about today. Emotional sensory overload. A few years ago, I discovered that I get overloaded emotionally when interacting with others. I pick up on their emotions in magnified ways sometimes. Sometimes I don't pick up on their emotions at all. This works in extremes. I either pick up on their emotions too much or not enough. I often find myself picking up on others' emotions too intently. This causes me to get overloaded and melt down. My friend's father passed away, and I tried to save her and make her happy again. So my friend in 2014, her father had passed away. And so I immediately thought that I was feeling more distraught than she was immediately, because I knew somebody dying is a bad event. This is a tragic event. So I needed to be able to help her or fix her or make her feel better. And so I immediately started fixating on, I need to send her a dozen roses every single day. I need to send her text messages 100 times per day, make sure she's doing okay. I wanted to have her food delivered to her house 3 meals per day, every day, until she felt better. So I was over responding to what her emotions really were. So we're going to talk a little bit later about like the emotional response to other people's emotions, but then there's also a social response to other people's emotions. And that social response is often related to your own emotional response. So for me, my social response to my friend's emotions is directly related to my emotional response to her emotions. Now, if my emotional response to my friend's emotions is out of context with her emotional response, then my social response is going to be out of context and be way over the top and scare her or push her away. So yeah, I wanted to send flowers every day, like I said, and text every day and provide daily meals to my friend. There was no casual way of showing my support for my friend, which means I'm not a gray person. So like, I think in terms of very black and white terms. So like, to just like send flowers one day out of the week doesn't make sense to me. Like I can't process that very well. So like if I'm going to send flowers to someone, I feel like I need to send them flowers 7 days a week, or I don't send them flowers at all. So it's very black and white, all or nothing thinking, and that gets me into some trouble. And I just get overloaded by my own emotions, because I think I get overloaded by my own emotions because my emotional response to my friend's emotions doesn't align with what her emotional response was. And so I'm having all these magnified emotions because, like her response is totally like just like not as intense as mine. And I'm feeling it more intently, and it's causing me to melt down. So emotional sensory underload is a little bit different. This happens when I don't pick up on someone's emotions at all. There could be something terribly wrong and I don't understand there's something wrong. Someone might have had a bad day, but I don't realize it. I don't respond to the person's emotions. This makes me a bad friend, and I'm unaware of others' emotions in this phase. Emotional sensory overload versus underload. Okay, this is very interesting here. Many autistic people are black and white thinkers. For me, this means I get overloaded or underloaded with input. This means I am either over-responding to friends and family members' emotions or under-responding. That goes back to what I was talking about, the emotional and social response. If my emotional response is over the top and out of context with my friend's emotions, then my social response is going to be way over the top in what I'm doing. For example, I'm feeling my friend's emotions way more magnified than what she's feeling them. So I feel like socially I need to send her a dozen roses every single day for 7 days a week, and it's over the top. There are no in-betweens. I'm 0 to 60 thinker, so I'm either at level 0 or level 60. And I'm very black and white again. And there's no ability to grasp a key gray concept. So I just can't comprehend that gray area in between, where I maybe should only send her flowers 2 days a week instead of 7 days a week. Matching emotions with others. It's very hard for me to feel the same emotions as peers. For one, I'm often wrong about their emotions. 2, I'm unsure of how to match my emotional response with their emotion. I also struggle to match my emotions with socially appropriate responses to events. That goes back to what we talked about. Again, my emotional response is out of context with my friend's emotional response. My social response is out of context with what it should be as well. I would always bring a dozen roses on a first date because I thought that was the emotion you should feel on a date. You should be very into someone. I thought you should be very interested in them. And I thought you had to show them you were into them by bringing them flowers and having that social response to the emotion that I was feeling. The problem is when you're on a first date with a girl, with a woman, she's often probably not feeling that emotion as magnified as I am. So to her, it's just hanging out. And to me, it was the state. And it was like, emotionally, I was feeling like I was attracted to her and wanted to get to know her. So I needed to do a social response to that. And I needed to send her flowers on the first date. And that just made things very awkward because it was my emotions were out of context with her emotions, what she was feeling. And my social response was way over the top because of that. I should have brought 1 rose, but I either brought a dozen or 0. So if I'm going to hang out with a girl or hang out with a woman for years, I would either bring a dozen roses or I wouldn't bring any at all. And again, there's an in-between ground. There's a gray area where I probably could have gotten away with bringing 1 rose instead of like a dozen roses and things like that. So a dozen roses made it feel like a date to me. If there was a dozen roses attached to it, then it was a date. So I was labeling things with physical objects. So I needed the flowers to be able to interpret this was a date, and so on. And so if there was no flowers, then it wasn't a date. If there were flowers, it was a date. Very black and white, no gray area. 0 roses felt like friendship. Overgeneralizing. I often overgeneralize my emotions to meet others' emotions. If someone is sad, I overdo it and feel they are very sad, very, very sad. If someone is happy, I overdo it and feel they are extremely happy. Neurotypicals are often somewhere in the middle. I don't have a middle ground. Someone might be happy on an 8 out of 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, they might be happy at level 8. And I would think they were on a 10 out of 10 on the scale. So my emotional response, my emotions would be at level 10, while their emotions were level 8. Therefore, my social response was appropriate with a level 10 social response. And it was just out of context, right? Because I'm at level 10, they're at level 8, if that makes sense. Someone might be sad on a 2 on the scale of 1 to 10, and I could think they were sad at a level 1. So like they might be extra sad, they might be sad at level 2, but I'm only interpreting them as sad at level 1. So therefore my social response of what I should do to help them feel better is at level 1. It's out of context with what it should be for their level 2, sadness. I would see happiness at either level 1 or level 10. So like there's no, you're either level 1 where you're really, really, really sad, or you're at level 10 where you're really, 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 really happy. And there's no in between for me. And so it's a very black and white world, a very rigid world for me to live in. Emotional overload leads to autistic burnout. Autistic burnout is something we don't talk about enough in the autism community. Autistic adults are starting to reach out about it and talk about it, so that's very good. I find that being overloaded by other people's emotions is exhausting. I'm constantly trying to determine how others feel. This causes me to get overloaded myself and feel autistic burnout. How do others naturally process emotions of others? I just don't understand how other people naturally process other people's emotions. I can become agitated and have meltdowns when not understanding emotions properly. So what is autistic burnout to me? Autistic burnout is when the processing system shuts down. It has been overworked. Too much time trying to read other people's emotions. What kinds of other things could cause autistic burnout? Masking is definitely something that causes autistic burnout. We'll talk about in the next couple slides here. And so working a job that you're not comfortable in can cause autistic burnout. It can be exhausting to go to work and do something you're not loving, you don't love to do. That can be for anyone, but especially true for someone with autism. And obviously, if you don't love the job, you're probably masking, so you're doing that as well. And then socializing in general can be extremely overwhelming and cause a lot of autistic burnout. So it can be exhausting to socialize because we don't understand the social world around us. We're constantly trying to interpret things and analyze things and things like that. So it's very exhausting for us. Masking is a major component of autistic burnout. Imagine trying to spend your whole day reading other people's emotions and socially trying to understand other people. Sometimes you forget that you even have your own emotions because you are trying to understand someone else's emotions all day. You never get to be who you are when you're masking. So masking continued. Masking is pretending to be someone you aren't to conform to societal rules or to please others. People mask when they convince themselves that they cannot be accepted for who they are. Masking is exhausting and a crucial contributor to autistic burnout, as discussed earlier. People who mask often develop comorbid mental health conditions. Common comorbid conditions include, but are not limited to, anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizoaffective disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder. You can see them there. So what are the most common mental health conditions associated with masking and autism? The most common comorbid mental health conditions with autism are anxiety and depression, with anxiety thought to be currently be the most prominent coexisting condition. Autistic people are also more likely to commit suicide. Why is that? Well, depression and autism go hand in hand. Imagine trying to read someone else all day long and understand what they're trying to communicate with you. What does their smile mean? What does their frown mean? What does the facial expression mean in general? What does their body language say about what they're trying to communicate? Why don't they just say what they mean? And if you live in a world that you don't understand and one that doesn't understand you, you'll become exhausted and depressed very quickly. How do I overcome a sensory emotion deficit? So for me, I read countless books on emotions and trying to understand others. I asked my friends and family a lot of questions to determine the emotion they are feeling. I used to never ask questions and I would always guess. Guess what? I always guessed wrong. I learned to think in pictures, and a smile means happy. So I trained myself with different smiles to recognize them to be happy. What I mean by that is, for scale, it's like, say there are like 10 different smiles, and level 1 is like you're kind of happy, sort of happy, and level 10 is you're extremely happy. So I tried to put together all these different smiles for each level. Now, obviously, there's way more than 10 levels, right? So I could never visualize an image of every single smile at every single level. But I think in pictures, and I put together all these smiles, and then I try to define what these smiles mean. So like this smile here means that they're level 1 happy. This smile here means that they're level 2 happy. This smile here means that they're level 3 happy. And this smile here means that they're level 4 happy. Now, when I do that, I then have to write down and think about social responses that you would do for someone who's at that level of happiness. So it's a very involved process and takes a lot of time, but thinking in pictures helps me to understand other people's emotions a lot better. And I do the same with frowns or sad faces. So again, level 1, there's a picture for level 1, picture for level 2, picture for level 3, picture for level 4. And I just, I do that and carry those pictures sometimes in my mind, so that when I see a frown or see a smile, I can recognize that and develop my own emotional response to that person's smile or frown that would be emotionally appropriate to the response that they're having. And therefore, because my emotional response is emotionally appropriate with their emotional response, my social response to them is now more appropriate and in line contextually with their emotions, which is very good. Asking for honest, direct communication. So yeah, I've learned to ask my friends and family for honest and direct communication. If my response to something they're feeling feels inappropriate to them, I ask to be notified of it immediately. I then ask for an explanation as to why someone feels the way they do. Then I try to put that explanation in my brain as a reference point in the gray area of life. So more than likely, when someone gives me an explanation as to why something I'm doing makes them feel uncomfortable, it's not at level 10 or at level 1, it's at a level 5 or level 6, it's making them feel uncomfortable. And so because I don't naturally recognize level 5 or level 6, I need someone to like define level 5 and level 6 for me. And then I can have this visual point in my head. This is level 5 because this is what this person defined level 5 to be. And so that helps a lot. That way I don't just keep overgeneralizing, but can generalize to another spot. So instead of overgeneralizing up to level 10 or down to level 1, I'm now able to generalize to level 5 or 6 like they've defined for me. If their explanation is at a level 6 out of 10, it helps me generalize to level 6 instead of 10 or 1, like I said. The problem is that there are more than 10 different emotional response levels. So there's an infinite number of them. Now I use level 1 through level 10 as an example, but there might be an infinite number, like I said. So there's thousands of emotional responses, and that means there's thousands of social responses. So it's a very complex social game, right? Meltdowns. So what causes autistic meltdowns? Lots of things, but we can usually sum it up to some type of overload that is often sensory overload. So I find, for me, at least for me, sensory input is often the cause of a meltdown. And for me, it's usually an emotional sensory input, not understanding how to emotionally respond to other people, and having like inappropriate emotional responses. So that leads me, and then people don't understand my emotional response. That causes me to melt down, and it's just this chain cycle reaction of events. So it can be caused by a physical sensory issue or an emotional sensory issue. How do we prevent an autistic meltdown? We don't really prevent it. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but we can actually do some things to help someone through the meltdown. We use social stories to talk about emotional states. I use social stories to train my brain to respond to differing emotions. Social stories help me because they give me a visual image to visualize. I think in pictures like Temple Grandin. If I can see an image in my brain, then I'm able to analyze it. In analyzing it, I am able to process the different emotional states. I may never have perfect emotional responses to my friends and family, but does anyone ever have a perfect response? I'm getting better at responding to my friends and family's emotions. Avoiding fixations on the extremes. So like anyone else, I like to be comfortable. The extremes are comfortable for me. The extremes are very comforting. So I'm very black and white. So level 10 is comfortable for me. Level 1 is comfortable for me. Levels 2 through 9 are not so comfortable. Levels 2 through 9 are that gray area that we're talking about here. I'm fixated on the black and white. That means that if I respond at level 10 and I'm over responding, I'm fixated on over responding, which means that that causes the whole fixation on sitting a dozen roses every single day. If I'm fixated on level 1 and I'm under responding, then I'm fixated on under responding in level 1. So that means I'm fixated on not doing anything, which probably means I'm actually fixated on something else in my own interest and my own preoccupation. Encouragement to grow. Like anyone else, I just need encouragement to grow and stop fixating. Trying new things is amazing. I'm shy and like to have positive encouragement from friends and family. I make overgeneralizations daily, but my social stories help me break them down, and I can break them down, and I am learning how to find different parts of the gray spectrum. Encourage gray thinking processes for your autistic loved ones, and teach social stories so that gray thoughts develop. So try and think of social stories that would help them with gray concepts. Instead of just being very black and white, if you want to encourage growth in the gray thinking processes, let's think of social stories that maybe don't have very black and white endings, and they're kind of left up into gray interpretations. And then help them define the gray areas. So if you're teaching a social story that's like at a level 5 out of 10 on a concept sheet or a conceptual level, define that. Try to define that as close as you can and explain that social story to them in a way that they can understand so that they're able to process the grayness of that story. And we'll talk more about that in a later slide. Fixations, obsessions, or special interest. Now we're going to transition into fixations, obsessions, or special interest here. So what's a fixation? Well, a fixation is an intense interest or obsession, in my opinion, that becomes overwhelming to the point where it interferes with your life to function clinically. Clinically interferes with your ability to function and develop friendships and relationships, go to work, go to school, or just do what you need to do socially in your life. What's an obsession? We all have obsessions, right? So obsessions are things that we're intently interested in, but they may not be clinically significant to the point that they interfere with our lives. We may still be able to go to work, we may still be able to go to school, we may still be able to build friendships and relationships. So those obsessions are probably not clinically interfering with our life. And then what's a special interest? Well, special interest is clinically significant for someone with autism, the fact that it can actually be a coping mechanism to help them through some of the challenges socially in the world that we live in. So for me, special interest is used to help me thrive in the world that I don't understand. So for example, I played the trombone in middle school and high school, and trombone was my special interest. I love to play the trombone. And in playing the trombone, I had a best friend. So the special interest can also be my best friend. And the trombone helped me. I didn't need to socialize with other kids so much. And that helped because I had a hard time socializing with other kids. I could easily socialize with my trombone. And I played the trombone, and I was very good at the trombone. And it actually got me into the Indiana University School of Music. And so that special interest was used to help me cope with the real world and that I didn't understand. Now, there are many similarities between all these three things, the fixations, the obsessions, and the special interests. The similarities are that they're all intense likes. They're all can be used as coping mechanisms to help with autism. And they're all some kind of a slight level of obsession. So I would put them all on the spectrum, like an obsession spectrum. I think of everything in spectrum because I think of autism as a spectrum. So I think of everything about autism as a spectrum. So like the obsession spectrum, you might have fixations down here, obsessions in the middle, and then special interest on the right. And that's simply because special interest can actually help you thrive. And so you're going to be functioning higher with the special interest than you are with the fixation. And you're going to be functioning in the middle with an obsession, in my opinion. And so those are the similarities. The differences are a special interest can help you thrive and help you function, to where I feel like a fixation can help you or can prevent you from functioning and slow you down enough. And the obsession is somewhere in the middle. It's not probably not going to help you, or probably not going to hurt you, in my opinion, for me. Fixating can lead to melting down. So sometimes my ability to fixate on something can be good and or bad. If I fixate on something positive, then good things can happen from it. If I fixate on something positive, it's more likely to turn into a special interest. If I fixate on something negative, my mental health can be impacted. Positive fixations lead to good mental health for me. Negative fixations lead to negative mental health. Some examples are positive fixating on working a job. So like positive fixation might be working a job that I love. A negative fixation might be like focusing on sexuality, or like building relationships, or being overly obsessed with building relationships, or things like that. How do we break the fixation? How do we help someone who fixates on something negative? Well, I like to be introduced to new topics of interest to see if there's an interest there. Try to modify how much time I spent fixating. Set a schedule and give me a certain time each day I can fixate on my fixation. Be aware of meltdowns if trying to lessen the fixation. And also be aware that what triggers the meltdown might not come immediately before the meltdown, and it could come days, weeks, or months before the meltdown. I need to fixate sometimes in order to be healthy. Okay, so meltdowns are not triggered by what you think. Many folks think a meltdown is triggered by an event that occurred immediately before the meltdown. I introduced that in the last slide. I find this almost never to be true. Meltdowns might be triggered by an event that happened weeks ago. They could even be triggered by a chain of events that happened a long time ago. Many of us are looking for that instant or immediate antecedent to see what triggered the meltdown. Therefore, we almost always miss the true reason for the meltdown. We will guide you to the reason for the meltdown. We often ask the wrong question. Many ask me how to prevent meltdowns. Instead, we should be asking how to help someone through a meltdown. We don't prevent people from getting upset. Everyone gets upset in their daily lives. It's how we cope with that anger that makes all the difference. We must learn to embrace the meltdowns and help our loved ones through the meltdowns. So if I'm having a meltdown, I don't necessarily want you to cure my meltdown or fix my meltdown. I want you to be in the moment with me and help me through my meltdown. And how we're going to do that is that we're going to escape into my imagination with me, and we're going to connect with me in my make-believe world through my special interest and help me through that meltdown by connecting with me, by loving me and respecting me and helping me through that meltdown. And so that's going to be the key to helping me with the meltdown and getting me through it. And I'm going to teach you how to escape into my imagination with me in a later slide. Love and respect are two very important things for anyone. We all love to be loved, like to be loved and respected. So there are two main things that help me through a meltdown. When people are very loving and respectful to me, it is very helpful. It's likely to end the meltdown sooner rather than later. Person-centered approach, connection is key. Love and respect make me feel connected. Escaping into my imagination with me. How do you connect with me? You take time and escape into my imagination with me. By escaping into my imagination, you enter my world and connect with me in your world. So what I mean by that is, that's kind of not worded the best way. Yeah, I'll have to fix that. But basically, by escaping into my imagination, connecting with me in my world, it allows me to feel connected. And once I feel connected to you in my world, I want to come out and connect with you in your world. So you've taken the time and the interest to connect with me in my world. So now I want to take the time and the interest to come connect with you in your world. So for a neurotypical, you come into the autistic world and connect with us in our mind and our world. we're going to be more likely to want to come into the real world you live in and want to connect with you in your world and understand your world and everything about you and what's going on in your life. I need to be connected with in my world so that I can connect with you in your world. Once I'm connected with in my world, I can begin to process my thoughts and feelings in your world. This allows me to process my meltdown in real time in the real world. I must be able to have meltdowns in my make-believe world first, then have you help me by connecting with me in my world. Then I can process my thoughts and feelings in the real world. So once again, if we process the meltdown in the make-believe world that I live in, and that I'm processing, then I can begin to process my meltdown in the real world. And that's very important. How do you connect with me in my world? I teach connection through the special interest. If you want to help me with a meltdown, you must know what my special interests are. Use the special interest when entering my make-believe world and connecting with me. The special interest is likely soothing or calming to me and can help me process my thoughts and feelings and emotions. I think social context and social stories. How do we use the special interest in the make-believe world and then come out into the real world and begin contextually using the special interest the same way in the real world as we used it in the make-believe world? So very important, like if I play the trombone in the make-believe world, then say I'm like imagining being principal trombonist for the New York Philharmonic in my make-believe world. Then in the real world, you're going to want to use an example of where I'm playing trombone with my college wind ensemble or with my high school band to help me snap out of that meltdown, because like I'm going to relate playing trombone in high school band to playing trombone for the New York Philharmonic in the make-believe world. And playing trombone in the high school band is realistic because I did that, whereas playing trombone for the New York Philharmonic is fantasy to me because I haven't done that yet. But if we can contextually relate the two together, then I'm able to process that meltdown through the trombone, through that special interest. I process it first in the make-believe world, and then I come out into the real world and I process that into the real world. And once I can process my meltdown in the real world and get through it, and I'm connected with in the real world, but after I'm connected with in the make-believe world first, then I can process it in the real world and connect with you in the real world. So I hope that makes sense. Communication is the key. I recommend trying to find social stories that are relatable to an autistic person's make-believe world or imaginary world. Match those social stories contextually to something from the real world. This is hard to do, but can be done. If someone likes Thomas the Train, for example, you would tell a social story about Thomas the Train in the make-believe world and escaping into their imagination with him. And then you'd bring them into the real world by telling them a story about riding a real train. Maybe they're having a meltdown about riding a train, for example. So you'd enter the world through Thomas the Train, enter their world through Thomas the Train. Then you connect with them in their world for a little bit, and then you tell social stories about riding a real train in real life. Try to make them both as contextually related as possible. Same setting, same people, etc. I like to use real people, so like real people from the person's life, so family, friends, things like that. Social thinking. So social thinking is a major component to life. Many autistic people struggle with this. Think of this as social and emotional competencies. Goes back to what we talked about earlier with sensory emotions. It's all relatable. So social thinking is the ability to process someone's emotions and feelings and thoughts and things like that. I interpret social thinking as how I think and process the social world around me. How do I interpret social skills that other people are using and then apply my own social skills to interact with them? I'm going to introduce you here to Michelle Garcia Winner, who's a social thinking guru. She's the mother of social thinking, author of several books. I recommend Socially Curious and Curiously Social. It's a good book. Some other great books of hers are How to Talk to Friends as one of them. How to Talk to Friends is a really great book. She has an entire website, socialthinking.com. And social thinking is directly related to social context for me, in my opinion. Social thinking is how we interpret and apply social context, like I mentioned earlier. I use social thinking skills to interpret the social context of the social situation I am in. What is the context of what someone is saying? In order to understand the context of what they are saying, I must first use social thinking to interpret their facial expressions and body language. Without the nonverbal communication, I am missing at least 50% of the context to what they are saying or meaning. Context is king. Peter Gerhardt is a behavior analyst. He says context is king, and I agree with him. Stories about social context. So, for example, on sexuality, social context is actually very big, and I have a different presentation on sexuality and autism. But social context, for example, many people with intellectual disabilities are taught to use a condom by putting a condom on the banana. Therefore, when it came to having time to have sex with someone, they would put a condom on a banana instead of on the penis. And that is an example of social context issues. Contextually, they were taught to put a condom on the banana. No one ever explained to them that the condom doesn't actually go on the banana, and that was just a practice tool. And so it's not because they didn't know how to put a condom on the right proper body part, it's because they were taught to put the condom on the banana, is why they did it. And that's a context issue. Another context issue I've heard of is I've heard of a woman who got pregnant because her mother and father told her that she couldn't get pregnant until she got married, meaning that they didn't approve of her getting pregnant until she got married. And Peter Gerhardt tells this story as well. I love Peter, so check him out if you don't know him. So they told her she couldn't get pregnant until she got married. And the girl thought that scientifically that meant she couldn't get pregnant until she got married. So physically, it's not possible to get pregnant. I don't need to use protection. Why would I even think of using protection if I can't get pregnant? And she ended up getting pregnant. So that's a social context issue where a mother said, you can't get pregnant until you get married. Daughter thought, I can't physically get pregnant until I get married. Whole chain of events unfolds. And now we have a girl who's a mother who's probably not ready to be a mother. And so on. And that is all I have for now. So I plan to add more to this presentation, and we will continue to learn more about autism as we go. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I'd like to thank you for having me, and thank you for watching my presentation. Check out my website, tbreedauthor.com, or email me at travis@tbreedauthor.com for more information or to book a presentation. Thanks for having me. Have a great day.